Constitution parents
Dave Cullen in the background there, computing forever. An interview by Howard there and Herman Kelly.
Yeah, well, we can see over the last 2 weeks, it's been a huge revelation that major players in all the big parties, be it Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin and the Greens, have all had photographs with paedophile promoting Peter Tatchell, and they are in power now. Now, I said, I was in Castlebar Radio there a few days ago, I said to him, he says, yeah, but the people voted for this government and they voted for the programme for government. I said, no, they weren't aware of that. There was no talk of the imposition of this LGBT, trans toilets. Let's get your kids in the schoolroom agenda before the election. But now, people are aware of it. And I said, even if 99% of the electorate voted for Sinn Féin and the Greens to impose their ideology on Irish children in schools, they couldn't do it. Why? Because we have a constitution which protects the primary duty of parents. The act is the guardianship and the protection of the children belongs to the parents, not to the state and not to the government. And it was introduced, the constitution, 1937, to protect, it was introduced at the time of fascism, to protect people against the power of the authoritarian state, be it communist or fascist, and that's why we must protect the liberties of Irish children and the freedom of Irish parents to protect them.
Now, when we talk about
that when I'm speaking today that I don't shout, because apparently you get accused of all kinds of things if you shout at speeches. So I'm going to try as much as possible not to do that. Although given the topic at hand, that's a little bit difficult to do as a father of children. I'm very glad to see such a large crowd turn out today. All of you from various groups and some of you just individuals here to make a very straight statement to the government about the protection of our children. And of all the twists and turns that we have had during the course of 2020, and my God, it has got to have been one of the strangest years by anybody's standards. Who would have imagined in January the number of things that have happened between here and now? But above them all, and standing head and shoulders in the filth, has got to be the fact that a group of Irish people have to gather outside of their houses of the Oireachtas to demand that paedophilia not be tolerated in this country in 2020. And the insanity that is involved in that being a necessity, and it is a necessity, is compounded by the fact that there are groups in this country who have spent the last week deriding everybody who intended to be here. We have arrived at the point in this nation's history when it is possible to stand up or go on social media or go on television and defend a paedophile apologist. And I make no excuses for calling Peter Tatchell a paedophile apologist. And I make no excuses either for adding another line. And he can sue me if he wants. Just me. Not the responsibility of anybody else in this crowd. By his association, the Minister for Children is himself a paedophile apologist. What he said
What? 1 minute. 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 1 min
what he said after 5 days of lauding Peter Tatchell and talking about what a great man he was on social media, he finally came out with a statement. He finally came out with a statement, not because he was put under pressure by RTE, because RTE didn't mention it at all, the state broadcaster, not because it was mentioned on TV3 because it wasn't, not because it was mentioned in the newspapers because it wasn't, but the social media pressure grew to such a point that he had to make a statement, and no journalist had spoken up until now, but they spoke in favour of Roderick O'Gorman when he came out to make a statement condemning people for having thrown foul abuse at him.
Yes.
I don't know how foul the abuse could be that might be thrown at somebody on social media that could compare to the foulness that is represented by Peter Tatchell. And he said, and this is his own explanation, 5 days to come up with it, and his PR experts too. He said, I might have reconsidered having that photograph taken and putting that tweet up if I'd known that Peter Tatchell was in favour of paedophilia. I might have. This is the person who is proposed as the Minister for Children in this country now. But then he said, and his media advisors came out and his media supporters came out and they said, look, it's one photograph. And one photograph doesn't make him responsible for what Peter Tatchell says. And Roderick O'Gorman said he didn't know what Peter Tatchell had said about paedophilia. There isn't a single person in the world who knows the name Peter Tatchell and does not know that he has publicly supported paedophilia in the past and repeatedly since. It is simply not believable to say that I only took a photograph with him and I didn't know what his opinions were. If you know who Peter Tatchell is, you know what he said. But it was only one letter to the Guardian newspaper, and it was edited. And thank God that Peter Tatchell clarified that first. Except he didn't tell us the part that it had been edited. The part that had been edited was not the part where he said that you could have a joyous experience as a 9-year-old child having sexual contact with an adult. That was not the piece that was denied. But then you say to yourself, look, let's be reasonable here. And I'm going to try and be reasonable here. It's only a photograph. And Roderick O'Gorman didn't say it. It's a bit like, you know, it's just a partridge in a pear tree, as it were. But that was the first day of Christmas. That was the first day of July, as it were. Because it turns out that Peter Tatchell didn't just write an edited letter to the Guardian. Peter Tatchell wrote a chapter for a book which is well known as the Paedophile's Handbook in Britain. But Peter Tatchell says he didn't know what book his chapter was going into. So he didn't know about all the other paedophiles.
Liar! Liar!
2 turtle doves and a partridge in a pear tree. Peter Tatchell then went on to make the exact same statement just 4 years ago, because another thing they say, it's a very long time ago. Now there's some things I've done a very long time ago and they're not letting them go. And I think some of the audience will be aware of what they are, and some of you were born after the things that I'm supposed to have done that were so very, very terrible. They didn't involve molesting a child. They didn't involve suggesting molesting a child. They didn't involve condoning. They didn't involve advocating. They didn't involve changes in the law. They didn't involve reduction in consent. They revolved around, I made a speech at a meeting in another country to an organisation who I have not spoken to in 20-something odd years. 4 years ago, Peter Tatchell repeated exactly what he had said, that you could have, and in particular he mentioned, and it's funny, he mentioned Derek Jarman, and he said, who is unfortunately deceased. Because Derek Jarman told him, unfortunately now he's deceased, we can't ask Derek Jarman, but Derek Jarman told him that as a 9-year-old child, he had had such a joyous sexual contact. No! That statement by a 50-year-old man about an experience which he had at 9 years of age would be recognized by any psychologist worth a good goddamn as being a defense mechanism that abused use to cope with how awful the events that happened to them were. And we can see the trace of damage. True. I see there are people actually here on behalf of the paedophiles. There are people who came to protest on behalf of paedophilia. Absolutely incredible. Absolutely no shame at all. Here for the paedophiles. Here for child rape. We're here to advocate child abuse. There are actually people who have attended this protest to advocate in favor of child abuse. Peter Tatchell, who, by the way, only made a mistake with the book, and only made a mistake with the letter, and only made a mistake with the statements made over and over and over again. Also gave an obituary to a man he knew well, who was involved in the paedophile information network. This is the man that Roderick O'Gorman says he might not have taken a photograph with him if he knew. The partridge in a pear tree has become 5 golden rings, 2 turtle doves, 3 French hens. It goes on and it builds and it builds. And the idea that he knew none of this at any time. Now, we see the people over there, and they remind me of that phrase that is used sometimes in politics. Be careful to choose the hill you die on. Be careful to choose the hill you die on. Because the hill that I'm willing to die on is the defense of my children against child rapists and abusers, whether they are at the highest level of government or the lowest level of street curb crawling. Be careful the hill you decide to die on in politics. That's a metaphor, by the way. That's a metaphor, by the way. There can be no scenario in which we can believe that Roderick O'Gorman does not share the fundamental worldview of Peter Tatchell. He had the audacity to announce on the day after his